we're at Cafe CLIL 11, Phil. Welcome.
Damn, yeah.
And in fact, what we did last time with 10, what have you got there? Is it another football team?
It's up the Mariners, Grimsby Town. I just thought I'd just give a bit more propaganda. You know, we're in the fourth round of the FA Cup.
Well done. Fantastic.
Your team Oldham isn't. I didn't want to say that.
No,
I'm sorry about that.
But they're not doing so bad. They're doing better.
They're not doing so bad. It's true. They're not doing bad. I'll give you that.
So I reckon, I mean, some of our listeners, viewers might be interested in our take on lower league English football, but we did say we'd come back to factors to consider implementing CLIL, because something quite interesting came out of discussion 10, where you mentioned the work of Biggs and constructive alignment, and I found that very, very focused and clear, and I think what we could do is recap that and expand it a little bit, because I think there are things that we feel CLIL offers that do facilitate Biggs' ideas. And he mentions and you spoke about the ILOs, the intended learning outcomes, and he mentions they need to be aligned with the TLAs, the teaching and learning activities, plus the ATs, the assessment tasks. It all needs to be aligned so that it's linked up in an intelligent way for all involved. And I went away and I thought about what sort of things I could think about, and these things kept popping out to me, Phil, about CLIL. You know, the focus on the language, for example, makes a teacher in CLIL think about what the concepts are demanding in terms of language. The procedures, another dimension from our book, the procedures in CLIL make the teacher focus on what the learners are expected to do, which is another big focus. And then the other thing I think that I'd like to talk about is you suggest in our book, Putting CLIL into Practice, that CLIL really needs teachers to rewrite their curriculum descriptors. So those are the three things I thought I could talk about, and I offer them to you as well. You know, come in and jump on any of those or extra aspects of Biggs' work. And maybe we start with language, Phil.
Okay, yeah.
And last time we spoke, you also mentioned, in a previous discussion, you mentioned the work of Mercer and his take on language. I mean, I think one of the things that is so clear to me about Biggs' work on constructive alignment is when teachers think about what the language demands are of what they've prepared for learners, it makes them focus on the activities, and it makes them focus on what the outcomes are going to be. And that's a crucial aspect of CLIL, isn't it? That the language dimension fine-tunes your focus to what's going to happen in the lesson, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. And you could also look at it the other way around as well, because I remember very clearly, you know, writing thousands of teachers' guides for the curriculum here and for the textbooks now, and you would often find that you came across as you said, a concept that was a complex one, and so what you would tend to find was if the concept was complex, then you were trying to break it down with a complex procedure. I mean, not necessarily, but probably. No? And then, of course, the linguistic implications of that. And so then that's, I think, how I came across that three-dimensional idea, you know, that they were all really working together. Yeah. And then, you know, you come across someone like Mercer, who came out with, who did research into the nitty-gritty, if you like, the real close components and mechanisms, narrow ones of classroom observation, particularly in foreign language classes. And he looked into native language classes and foreign language classes. He looked at both, you know, but he found pretty much the same thing, you know. And and again, we talked about this also in I can't remember which podcast it was. We were talking about sequences, and we were trying to suggest why sequences were so important in CLIL. And we said that, well, because if a teacher is able to focus on particular parts of a class and the particular demands of those classes, then they're much more likely to be able to control, let's say, the linguistic demand that's taking place at those different parts. So, linguistic demand is often lighter at that beginning of a sequence, and it's heavier at the end. Obvious example. No? So we did talk about that, and Mercer's idea of exploratory. What was it, exploratory, disputational, and cumulative language, again, is, for me, a very sequential thing. So CLIL teachers, as you said quite rightly in the introduction, if CLIL teachers are aware of those things and they can concentrate on them, then, that alignment, that you're helping that alignment in the curriculum.
And some of the work of these other programs, we repeatedly mentioned the WIDA project and the curriculum discourse function study in Europe. They always come back to connecting language with conceptual demands in the curriculum. Yes. And I think, Big's work, the constructive alignment, it fits so nicely within what we're trying to offer with CLIL. The specific targeted language dimension of our approach helps bring that alignment, doesn't it? So teachers teach language so that learners can talk right curriculum concepts. It just makes so much sense. In Anglia School, I can think of a couple of quick examples that I love to share with colleagues. For example, we get our very young learners to test sinking and floating quite a lot, maybe too much. But the space of that little experiment of things sinking and floating is such a perfect context for young children to begin to develop conceptual awareness of different phenomena. I mean, in one case, I use with colleagues in Cyprus as the theme of autumn, and I walked around the parks and gardens on my dog walk in the morning and picked up seeds and fruits and nuts and things and all sorts of stuff. Took it all with me to Cyprus with these primary school teachers, and we started the session with the sink or float. And I made a chart of the 10 items, very simply, with a green tick at the top of one column or a red X at the top of the next column, and then a question mark in the third column. They had to predict whether each seed, fruit, or whatever it was, would sink, float. And then we'd test it, and then they would mark the last column with the result. Yeah. And the great thing about that is, for very young learners, you can do it almost without any language, It's a nice context for teaching that vocabulary of the autumn fruits and seeds and things. But the language of prediction can be very complicated there. Do you think it will float? Do you think it will sink? You can keep it as simple as you like, though, can't you? Float? Sink? And change the intonation in your voice once you've done the test.
No, absolutely. No, it's a great example. Sorry, keep going.
No, and that's an example I just wanted to share because it really shows a very clear connection between Big's idea of constructive alignment, curriculum objective, understand properties of different materials, and here we use autumnal fruits and seeds. Do they sink? Do they float? And then test them and comment on the results. So that's just one example from Anglia School practice, which I think is a very good example.
Well, let me just come in there because I like what you're saying there. It's a bit like the tyre example as well that I took from your school. But let's just look at the word constructive as well, constructive alignment. So he's using constructive there, and he's obviously winking at constructivism. That's what he's talking about. And of course, because alignment curriculum can be aligned, but we wouldn't necessarily like it. That's why he's thrown in constructive as an adjective there to make sure that it's constructive alignment. And constructive, what he means by constructive is, people get scared with the idea of constructivism. They say, oh God, you can go on for pages and hours about what it means. But basically constructivism means that you're starting where the learners are at. Or if you're a trainer, you're starting where the trainers are at. Constructivist training as well. And if you've got obviously a heterogeneous group, that's what you would try to practice as much as possible now. So what you've just described there, does it float, does it sink? And by using stuff that you've gathered from the forest and that kids themselves are aware of, and that they understand what they are, it becomes constructivist as well. But the other point is, the other point I quite like is that you can look at it in a grammatical sense as well. Because if you say, as I did say to the last group I was training in Serbia, I said, right, as I showed them the picture of your school in the tire, and I said, can a 4-year-old hypothesize? There was a kind of silence. I used the word hypothesize. I didn't say, you said predict, Keith. I said, can a 4-year-old hypothesize? And there was this kind of silence. They were worried. And so half the class said yes. And some of them said no. So I said, well, if you got children, and half of them put their hands up, and I said, if you say to your child, look, it's raining outside, put your raincoat on, okay? We're not going to go out like that. And they go, I don't want a raincoat on. You say, if you do not put your raincoat on, what will happen? I'll get wet. Of course, a child can hypothesize at the age of 3 or 4. Of course they can. It's just a question of making the linguistic construction, if you do not, salient, and you're probably not going to do that with a 4-year-old in the class, but you'll use that language, and little by little they'll pick it up. So that's, again,
and I think
a simple idea of constructive alignment, linguistically speaking.
I think you're absolutely right. Sorry for interrupting, but to bring you back to what Biggs writes, he actually writes, if you're going to have an outcome that includes certain linguistic items, you need to use those linguistic items in your teaching and learning activities, so that when the outcomes arrive, the learners have had chance to experience that language. So that's why I think that's a very good example, because you can make the language as simple or as complicated as you like, depending on where your learners are at and what you'd like them to be able to come out with at the end. We thought it would sink, but it floated, for example, maybe even extending that even further, depending on where they are cognitively, talking about any reasons they can give for the result they got that was not what they expected, for example. And I think that's exactly what Biggs is saying, isn't it? It's being aware of the language demands of your TAs, your TAs, and then working to use some of that language in your activities, in your classroom activities. And a couple of other examples, just to throw them in, because I'll make a little picture there. With our youngest children, we get them to observe all sorts of phenomena as well. They dissect all sorts of things, usually apples and things like that. Nothing actually more gruesome. But they look at parts of things. Then they do experiments with those dissected parts, such as observing change over time. And so with apples, our children will name them, skin, flesh, core, pips, for example. And then with the flesh, they'll place the apple flesh in different liquids. And they'll have 24 hours or a few days to see how the material changes. And they'll make notes of their results, usually on graphic laminated sheets that they colour or stick things on. And that's all part parcel of the conceptual demands of the early years curriculum program. And I'm very satisfied having got into Biggs thanks to you, because my teachers and my manager are all about recycling all of this procedural experience and language experience through their very nice craft and science activities and so on.
But you see how CLIL enables you to, as you say, was it looking for the language, as you call it, and seeing the language? As you're speaking there, I'm just seeing the language straight away. And that's why it's powerful when you work with subject teachers who are not used to thinking about language. If you do what you just said, if you're going to observe those changes over 24 hours or over longer, well, present perfect, no? Because when you come back to talk about it, how has it changed? How has it changed? It's just so obvious.
Yeah,
It's so
yeah,
obvious that that is an effective way of starting to use the present perfect. Whereas, if you take a stepped language curriculum course, again, to be critical of that, but you're not going to get that until we don't do the present perfect until after A2 or
yeah,
something.
yeah, yeah,
It's kind of weird, but by doing that, in that, letting the language naturally come from that constructivist, if you like, sort of framework. It seems to be much more effective to me. I mean, so
yeah, yeah,
if as again, it can be aligned, but if it's constructivistly
yeah, yeah,
aligned, then all the better.
yeah. I mean, another example, because it's not just fun stuff. We think very carefully about how concepts cyclically reappear, because of the thematic approach we take. And magnets, does it stick or does it not stick? Is it magnetic? Is it not magnetic? And our youngest learners are frequently testing stuff for their magnetic properties or otherwise. And again, it's organized in a hypothesis kind of relationship between the children and the objects, and they test them and they gather results. And the last example I thought of for being aware of language in that way, and then to come back to Biggs, so thinking of what you want to come out of your learning sequence, and then predicting language and putting it within the sequence so that you've got that repetition and recycling of those phrases is my manager Deanna's an artist, and she did a week on Da Vinci, I think I might have mentioned before, and our youngest kids made colored paper, tissue paper collage artwork of the Mona Lisa. And very simple, a lovely kind of activity for very young learners, 2 to 4. What they were doing, we were looking at color combinations, looking at associations of color to do with parts of the face and the clothing. They were looking at hyphenated adjectives for combined colors, yellow, brown, for example. So no matter how young they are, if you predict language from what your tasks dictate,
Yes.
and then work to repeating that, we do it through rhyme. And then when the children are actually creating, they quite naturally repeat a rhyme or a song where we've done some practice beforehand. So that was really thinking about Biggs and language. I think it's crucial that the teachers are aware of what the language demands are of their curriculum, prepared lesson curriculum objectives.
We come back inevitably, Keith, don't we, every time to the 3 dimensions, and it's nice that we do come back to it. But again, it's obvious.
Yeah.
If you've planned the conceptual idea, where you just explained, you've planned that conceptual idea, you think about the procedures in order to make the concepts salient themselves.
Yeah.
And then you think about what language will arise from those 2 decisions, and that's surely what education should be. It shouldn't be the other way around, I don't see how it can be the other way around. You're not going to plan that Anglia School stuff by saying, well, I think we should look at the present perfect today, you 5-year-olds, and so let's look at the changing state of apples. It just doesn't work like that. It doesn't work like that, and so I don't understand what the problem is with doing CLIL. There you go. Sorry, quick rant.
Well, that brings us to perhaps my second takeaway from Biggs is the procedures aspect, the procedural dimension, Phil, because he actually writes.
Let me just shut this up.
Go ahead. He actually writes that we need to focus, teachers need to focus on what we expect learners to do, what we get learners to do, rather than what we want to teach them. You know what I mean? It makes complete sense when you think about CLIL in the 3 dimensions, because the procedural dimension, for me, is the backbone of most of what we do, because the language and the concepts will be shaped by, and the meat from that we put on the skeleton is the language and the concepts, but the procedures really
Mm.
are crucial. You know, what are you going to get your learners to do? And I think about my wife, go right at the other end of the spectrum for learners in a biochemistry lecture she was in. It was a pharmacology theme, and the professor was talking about different drugs and their effects on different areas of the human organism, nerve groups in the human organism affected by different drugs. And my wife had written down practically everything the professor had said in the lecture, and she's back at home with these pages and pages of transcribed things that she's got to cram for an exam, you know. And I said, can I help? And she said, what do you know about pharmacology? I don't know anything about pharmacology. But together we managed to identify that the professor's content was a huge tree diagram of holinotropic medical substances divided into two subgroups of holinomitic and holinolytic, if I'm getting the words right. And they're further subdivided, and these subdivisions lead to names of groups and the effects they have on different nerve areas in the human organism. And so we kind of condensed the 20 pages into a tree diagram, and that's what I'm trying to say about Biggs and focusing what we want learners to do. And of course he's writing about this university level. What we're taking out of it is something very applicable for preschool, primary, secondary. You know, it's that what you get them to do, and in this case a professor giving a lecture wasn't really interested in what the students were doing with their content. That might sound harsh on my part, but to cut to the chase, I'd say, give them the tree diagram, maybe with bits missing, and let them follow, let them talk to each other, give them a few breaks during your lecture and say, share what you've got with your neighbor. Because that also Biggs suggests, you know, if you create a social enterprise rather than a delivery enterprise, which is what I think I described at the beginning, you get social constructivism in education, which is really what he's writing about.
That's a great phrase. That's I like that. Yeah, the delivery thing, the delivery enterprise. I like that, as opposed to the other one. Yeah, I like that. You know, I just keep. It is a bit odd in a sense that he got the idea from in tertiary education, as you say, you know, because it seems to me that, well, it's not odd, but it seems to me that, you know, its applicability to education in general is total. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Maybe moving out of that specific idea, I had an example. I thought of it, just a very simple example of alignment, Keith. Maybe just come back to that macro idea, you know. And I was just thinking about, you know, before we came on, about a simple example how a curriculum would align, you know, with the ILOs and the TLAs, because most curricula, for example, in Europe, here's one. Most curricula in Europe will mention intercultural awareness now. Now, the English national curriculum mentions it. You know, let's go there in a moment. But you know, it goes there, and yet it's a stubbornly monolingual scholastic setup. You know, and yet it talks about intercultural awareness. Is there a misalignment? I think so. But you know, I don't think it's not rocket science to see that, is it? But if you've got intercultural awareness written into the descriptors of a curriculum, well, then Biggsy's saying, what are the TLAs that will carry out? You know, what is an aligning factor? And we said last week that what's interesting about alignment is that you can have a curriculum that is perfectly aligned, you know, maybe not constructively, and then you're bringing CLIL into that. You're bringing CLIL in as a kind of alien factor, let's say. Yeah. So because we were talking about the positive and negative counterweights, no? So it could be that CLIL would misalign your curriculum. I mean, it's possible, given but if you've got in your curriculum descriptor cultural awareness, which all your curricula do, you know, then surely CLIL is not going to misalign. If it might even just help to bring it up there and align it, you know, by bringing it in. And that's what those stakeholders, let's say, who are thinking of introducing and implementing CLIL, which is what we were talking about last week, would see. That seems to me. Now, if you look at, let's go back again. I mean, we have been throwing tomatoes at the English national curriculum, but there's obviously also great stuff going on there. But in terms of what we're talking about, intercultural awareness here and literacy, let's look at literacy. Now, the national curriculum in England introduced literacy in the late 90s. I think it was Blunkett, wasn't it? It was the Blair government. Fantastic stuff, fantastic stuff. Nothing against it. It wasn't exactly language across the curriculum, perhaps as Bullock meant it, but it was certainly getting there. And the literacy was about, if I understand it properly, it was mainly about oracy. It was about reading strategies, and it was about love of literature, getting people reading. Yeah. Great stuff, no problem with that at all. And that's still going on, Keith, as far as I know, with the 4 key stages. But hang on, if you look at the key stages in the English national curriculum, languages, history and geography, for example, languages stop at key stage 3. They don't go any further. So the 11, I think key stage 3 is 11 to 14, no? So after 14, you're not obliged anymore to indulge, let's say, in foreign language learning. Well, why have the people constructing that curriculum not considered foreign languages to be part of what they call literacy? I'll leave a silence there to pause for thought. How can you have a real kind of literacy unless you are at least obliging students to do a foreign language until 16? Surely, everything we've learned in CLIL certainly about the effect that doing complex stuff in an L2 or an L3 helps you in literacy, rebounding back to the L1 you said before we started.
I think we showed that graphic, didn't we, of percentage of adults reporting not knowing another language. And the small countries, you've got to take your hat off to lots of these small countries where children grow up and they've got a mother tongue and they become fluent in 2 other languages. It's a very worthy and laudable situation to be in, isn't it?
Yeah, I'd go further than Biggs, Keith, and I would say that if you are talking about literacy in a curriculum and yet you stop the study of foreign languages at the end of key stage 3, what you're doing is you're just encouraging a sort of a dysfunctional monolingual scholastic system. It's dysfunctional, Keith. I'm sorry. It's not misaligned. It's dysfunctional. It just doesn't make any sense. Everything we know about cognition now, what's going on? And it's weird. England is the exporter of ELT. It's the grand exporter of this massive business.
It is.
Its government. Its government doesn't encourage the learning of foreign language.
Speaking optimistically, Starmer's brought the UK back into the Erasmus programme very recently. We might see a move back towards compulsory language teaching and learning, modern language teaching and learning in the UK. I don't know, but I think we don't need to get stuck on that issue today, because I think the big context we're in offers lots and lots of really positive messages for teachers. And the other thing, my other takeaway, which I'd like to get to, which is actually something you wrote in our book, and that is the need to rewrite your curriculum descriptors from, I think he uses the term surface level understanding to become deep level curriculum descriptors, and that deep level curriculum descriptor writing to connect with Big's work, I think you write about in our book, where you take a traditional curriculum descriptor about the solar system, I think, and then you adapt it to include procedures and language. Would you say a few words about that?
Well, yeah, I was even thinking also the work of the Gratz group, the pluraliteracies, they made it plural, where they also talk about deeper learning. Oliver Mayer talks about, deeper learning, and sometimes it can seem a bit annoying, what is deeper learning? But it is true, obviously, that I think that Biggs has like 5 levels, and that it's that 5th level is the deeper one, where everything's, what's it called, interrelational, I think he calls it. And I would go with that. So if you wanted to make deep learning concrete, then Big says that it's not looking at concepts in isolation, although you
Yeah,
understand them very
yeah,
well. It's looking at them as interrelational, and so
yeah,
again,
yeah,
that's also constructive, isn't it? You get that yourself now. I
yeah.
forgot what I was supposed to be talking about now, Keith.
Well, I made a note of that from our book, where you talk about the solar system, and you take
Yeah, yeah,
a standard descriptor, which is to differentiate between the planets in the solar system,
yeah,
full
yeah.
stop, and then you add procedures to that by interpreting, transcribing, and producing descriptions, and then
Yeah,
you
use
add
it.
language to that
Yeah,
using derived adjectives, comparative, superlative forms, and
yeah.
language to express relative distances. And I think, the actual rewriting of a traditional curriculum descriptor in that way, it's not just CLIL, it's also reflecting what Biggs writes about being visible, making learning visible, and language is part of it. The solar system is a
Yeah,
very good example, isn't it, of Biggs suggesting teachers need to think about the conceptual demands, think about the language involved, use the language that the conceptual demands
yeah.
require, but you've got to write that in the curriculum guidelines.
That's it. That's it. That's what I do in my training sessions now. If I have a group for about 3 days, what I get them to do in the end is to write an objective for one of their classes, but
Yeah,
I call it a three-dimensional objective. Well, actually, I call it four-dimensional now, because now you can also add that attitudinal one at the bottom as well. That
yeah, sure.
needs extending, but that's a kind of alignment, isn't it? What we're doing there is we're aligning the conceptual, the procedural, and the linguistic demands. We're saying, look, these three things are all connected. They're not isolated.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
You can't possibly isolate them. Well, you never. I don't think teachers ever did, but I think that three-dimensional setup, if you like, does make it more salient.
yeah, yeah,
That it's usually an infinitive, isn't it? To something, to differentiate among the planets in the solar system by, and then it becomes a gerund, by doing this, that, and the other. In that case, in the solar system, it was actually a running dictation. But again, what procedures do a running dictation require?
yeah,
Well, they
yeah, yeah,
require the transformation of this speech to writing, etc.,
yeah,
etc.,
yeah, yeah,
and then using the language which derives from those decisions again. The language
exactly.
derives from those decisions. Obviously, the language of the solar system or the language of planets, the inherent lexis, we know what it'll be. Gaseous planets, solid planets,
Absolutely.
and all the rest of
And I
it.
think
There's much more.
I mean, that's the area of the expert. There's no question that teachers know that stuff, but it's the thinking about what you're going to get your learners to do in order to get them to experience those concepts and language, isn't it? And now that's our 30 minutes. But you mentioned the assessment tasks, and also the attitudinal dimension.
Mm.
And Biggs does write a lot about summative and formative assessments.
Yeah.
It might be that we need to do a session on assessment, Phil.